Cat Show. You're listening to the Marketplace Morning Report from APM, American Public Media.
FSCJ Artist Series presents the Ultimate Queen Celebration, featuring lead vocalists recognized by original Queen members. October 18th at Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets at fscjartistseries.org.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, there was more debate than demagoguing last night in the first and only vice presidential debate. Public policy expert Rick Mullaney provides political analysis and takeaways. Then, welcome to the agrihood. We look at how a development trend that incorporates agricultural aesthetics is impacting rural Florida. And boys playing girls sharing aging and angst, a gender-bending stage version of the classic sitcom Golden Girls. Join the conversation. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or
Washington. I'm Korfhage Coleman. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance squared off last night in New York in their lone scheduled vice presidential debate. As NPR's Ben Giles reports, the Democratic governor and the Republican senator each played to their strengths.
Walz found his groove advocating for reproductive rights while attacking Trump for his boasts of ending federal protections for abortion. Vance sought to turn several issues into a referendum on immigration and the border, blaming immigrants as a root cause for issues from crime to affordable housing. And the candidates sparred over January 6th as Vance glossed over Trump's role in the insurrection at the Capitol.
It's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country.
Walz criticized Trump for already laying the groundwork for his supporters to reject election results if Trump loses again. Ben Giles, NPR News.
President Biden will visit North and South Carolina today for a briefing on recovery efforts following Hurricane Helene. Vice President Harris will go to Georgia. The storm killed at least 160 people in the southeast. Authorities are still working to restore services such as power and water. Sherry Brown lives in Augusta, Georgia, where city officials have told residents to boil water for safety.
It's awful, and we hadn't even been able to get out of our driveway. Our car is blocked in behind the tree, and it has been, we run around, we got coolers, we filled them with water, and that's what we use them for our water.
Officials in Tennessee have told people in 9 counties to drastically conserve water as they work to repair destruction. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to retaliate after Iran fired about 180 missiles in its airstrike last night, according to the Israeli military. In a speech today, Netanyahu said Iran had made a, quote, big mistake. NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi has more.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated his military on its role in deterring the Iranian missiles with its powerful air defense system. He also had a warning. Whoever attacks us, we will attack them, Netanyahu said. He went on to list a number of places, including the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria. Iran fired about 180 missiles, according to the Israeli military, sending millions of people in Israel to bomb shelters. In a social media post on X, the Iranian mission to the United States said that its response was, quote, duly carried out, but that if Israel retaliated, a, quote, crushing response would ensue. Iran's missile attack is the latest escalation between Israel, Iran, and its proxies in the Middle East, inching the region to a wider war. Hadil Al-Shalchi, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And this is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. A 47-year-old Fleming Island man is guilty of felony destruction of government property related to the January 6, 2021 breach at the U.S. Capitol. A federal jury in Washington, D.C. also found Marcus Smith guilty of 6 misdemeanor offenses, including entering a restricted building and physical violence in the Capitol, prosecutors say. According to evidence, Smith traveled from Jacksonville on January 5th with 3 others, then went to the Capitol the next day with a large crowd of rioters. He entered the Capitol but was blocked by police officers and helped other rioters smash open another door that dates back to the 1870s, then tried to walk further into the Capitol. The FBI arrested him on January 26th in Fleming Island. His sentencing is set for January 10th. The city of Jacksonville officially commits $50 million towards the construction of the new Museum of Science and History on the North Bank. The money, approved by the city council last week as part of Jacksonville's capital improvement plan, will be dispersed over a 3-year period. Mosh has agreed to spend at least $85 million on the design and construction of the new museum on Gator Bowl Boulevard across from Intuition Ale Works. This afternoon in Jacksonville, we're going to be mostly cloudy with highs in the upper 80s. Winds will be between 5 to 10 miles per hour from the north, and a shower is possible mainly south of the I-10 corridor. Mostly clear overnight with lows in the lower 70s, warm and dry tomorrow.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Charles Stuart Mott Foundation, for nearly a century, supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society. More at mott.org. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, are they farm-to-table suburban utopias or just a means of greenwashing traditional urban sprawl? We explore the concept of the agrihood as that development footprint steps for the first time onto the First Coast. But first, last night was a spirited but not mean-spirited debate between VP contenders Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. To help us break down the candidates' performance and any potential political implications, we welcome now Executive Director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute, Rick Mullaney. Good morning.
Good morning, Ann. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you, Mr. Mullaney. So the rule of the VP debate is always do no harm. Did the candidates hit their mark?
If that's the standard, I think they did. But I think you captured it in your introduction. It was spirited but not mean-spirited. I would say in 2024, of all the debates we've seen, this was, quite frankly, the best debate in terms of policy. Big policy discussion, a lot of substance, more civility. And I often talk about what's called the politics of personal disparagement, where you personally attack the other side. This was a refreshing change in that you did not see that. There weren't any major mistakes, but in particular, coming into this debate, I thought J.D. Vance had a bit of a challenge because the public portrayal of him was one that was a challenge for him. He had higher unfavorabilities than Walz, who had greater favorabilities. And overall, for him on that do no harm, he had more to do than do no harm. He needed to affirmatively introduce himself, and he needed to defend the Trump record, and he needed to go after the Kamala Harris record. And I thought he had a very good night. For Walz, however, a little different place, more favorability, more folksy, more likable. His approach was a little bit different, a little uneven in the beginning, but came on stronger at the end.
Yeah, and so you were talking before we started the program about this split screen presentation and how it's been different for each of the debates in terms of how it favored different candidates. Tell us a little bit about how you thought it's worked its way through the system.
And it's sort of it's an interesting topic. And when the cameras are on for 90 minutes, there's a split screen and you see both of the candidates. And that is communication. In the courtroom, juries don't just look at the witness. They're paying attention to everything in the courtroom. And for those watching the debate, they're paying attention to the split screen. So go back to June when you had the split screen between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That split screen was won by Donald Trump. Joe Biden struggled in the split screen. He often looked lost. He looked confused. It was a difficult night for Joe Biden. That split screen went to Donald Trump. Go to the Kamala Harris-Donald Trump debate. That split screen went to Kamala Harris dramatically. She smiled. She was calm. She was in control. She had the hand under the chin a couple times to make her point. Obviously, she'd been very well prepared. This split screen wasn't as dramatic as those two, but it was advantage J.D. Vance. He appeared calm, at times kind of smiling, seemed in control. And for Walz, who's very personable and connects with people on a very basic level, the guy next door and a friend down the street. He was at times a little bit scattered and at times a little bit frenetic in his approach. And I thought on the split screen, it was an advantage to J.D. Vance. Not as dramatic as the other, but it's something they should pay attention to because when the cameras are rolling, they're on both of you and they're watching you both. It's kind of like children watching their parents. They're always watching.
That's right. If you're just joining us, we're talking to public policy expert Rick Mullaney about last night's VP debate, and you can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. There were some very specific policy issues discussed. Big ones were, immigration, abortion, climate change, January 6th. Just give us the nickel version of how you think the candidates did on some of those major topics.
Well, you're right. And I would say one of the big public policy issues was right out of the box. The very first question, given Iran's attack on Israel, which is, would you support a preemptive strike against Iran? This is one in which I think J.D. Vance scored some big points. In his first he introduced himself to the public, and I wondered if he was going to take forever to do that, but he did it reasonably well. And he had that theme of working class family. But in answer to that substantive question, he said that is Israel's decision to make, and the United States would be supportive of that. Now, that is a more direct answer than we've heard from Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, or Joe Biden, and from Mr. Walz, who really did not answer that, but then attacked Donald Trump. From there, it went on to immigration, in which I thought J.D. Vance was very well prepared in bringing it back to what had happened during the Trump years. But I think Walz was prepared with the strongest argument on the Democratic side, which is there's this bipartisan bill that would have improved things that Donald Trump stood in the way of. But as the night progressed on those issues, early I think it was advantage to Vance, but later in the evening, particularly on abortion, substantively an advantage to Walz, who was very prepared on that issue. And I think J.D. Vance tried to present a more empathetic approach for Republicans, talking about being pro-family, but it still doesn't carry the day quite on the abortion issue. Same was true in healthcare, in which I think Walz scored points, and on the threats to democracy at the end. But if you look at the overall arc of the discussion, from taxes to J.D. Vance inserting energy, really wasn't one of the questions, to immigration, to healthcare, to abortion, a lot of substance, a lot of policy discussion, and far less of the personal attacks and the personal disparagement, which is not only distracting, takes away from the quality of the debate. So overall, I give both candidates high marks for a substantive debate.
Yeah, it feels like in some ways this was kind of the debate that we wish we had been seeing. I mean, it really did have a more traditional atmosphere, a lot of discussion, not, in accordance. I mean, they definitely were disagreeing very strenuously on a lot of things, but civil.
And it really was. I think in some ways, it was a throwback to the way debates used to be conducted. And quite frankly, and I'll express a bias up front, I have a preference for this. I have a preference for a respectful discussion. They were both respectful to each other. They weren't personal in their attacks. But I think each of them strategically recognized that the other wasn't the target. And so Vance was not going after Walz. He was going after Harris. And Walz wasn't going after Vance. He was going after Trump. And so it was easy for them to say, I agree with you on that. But I disagree with your boss. And they did that several times. You could see Vance and Tim Walz oftentimes agreeing with each other, but then they were attack dogs and going to the top of the ticket. So I thought last night's debate was refreshing. I actually hope it's a model for the future. I doubt that will take hold. You'll see those spirited, contested, personal attack debates in the future. But I think the public is hungry for substantive discussions with fewer personal attacks, and you can disagree on policy. And they did. And they clashed. And as you said, this may have been civil, but a lot of punches were thrown. But they were policy punches. They weren't personal punches.
One of the challenges that Senator Vance had was in terms of defending his boss's comments on some things, including calling climate change a hoax. And I thought his answer was interesting. Nobody really pressed him on it, but he said, we could maybe that's true or maybe that's not, but let's not have a debate about the weird science. But he went on to then, also be asked about his own comments about his future boss if they're elected, critical of Donald Trump.
I thought that Vance's approach was interesting. They went through a litany of comments that J.D. Vance had made in the past about Donald Trump, and a strong litany. The Hitler comment, the economic populism comment, some strong comments that he made. And last night in the debate, I thought he was very forthright. He said, I was wrong. I mean, that is a pretty dramatic statement. And then he went on to explain why and to talk about the Trump policies. I thought that for Mr. Walz, he struggled with that when they talked about China and where he was in Tiananmen Square. and he kind of tried to almost filibuster that a little bit until they got back to the point where he said, well, I misspoke. And so sometimes that I was wrong will carry the day. But for Vance, he was in a tough spot because he is at odds with his boss and his view is what his boss has done in the past, but also in having to defend some of the positions and the personal attacks of Donald Trump. So I think at least for last night, Vance was able to fend those off pretty well and then pivot to his main themes. And I thought he was disciplined. Unlike Donald Trump's debate, he was very disciplined in going after the Harris record and tying her to Joe Biden, but also very disciplined in trying to say, well, whatever ideas she has, why hasn't she done it for the last 3.5 years? Why doesn't she do it right now? Those were not things that Donald Trump did in his debate. He tried it in his closing argument. So overall, I thought you saw a more disciplined Vance, certainly more disciplined than Donald Trump in the first debate.
Yeah, and he definitely didn't revisit some of the controversial comments he's been making about Haitian migrants or, people eating pets. I mean, he didn't get caught up in that really kind of toxic narrative.
And I think you're exactly right. And whether that's a missed opportunity for Walz or whether that was strategic to go after Trump, I'm not sure. But I was very surprised that the childless cat ladies did not come up. I was very surprised about the Haitian immigrants eating pets did not really directly come up. Inferentially, it came up. And that was a decision that Walz had to make. But I think he made the decision that they were not going after Vance. They were going after the top of the ticket. And Walz, I thought, consistently for the 90 minutes, pivoted to go after Donald Trump, to criticize Donald Trump. And I think that's where he needed to be. And then he would come back to boost the Harris record.
We've got a call from Sally in Springfield. Good morning, Sally. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. My question is this. Why are the blatant and provable lies told by Vance and Trump not part of debate critique? I feel that we can't, as a nation, continue to treat smooth and forceful lying as if it was a debate win or as if it doesn't happen. It's not respectful when one candidate continues to lie.
Sally, is there a specific instance that you're thinking of?
I am. I'm thinking of the statement that January 6th was a peaceful transfer of power. I'm thinking of how Vance yesterday mentioned that Kamala sets policies when vice presidents do not do that. It's Congress. And as for Trump, in his debate, talking about the Haitian immigrants, the legal immigrants in Springfield and what they are doing.
Yeah. Thanks, Sally. Appreciate that. Rick?
It's interesting. You can take this a legalistic approach or debate approach, and the question's pretty straightforward, which is there are going to be times when on the Republican side, they feel like the Democrat is not telling the truth. And there'll be times on the Democratic side when they feel like the Republicans are not telling. And how do you deal with that? In the first debate with Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, they made the decision that this was going to be the candidates making those judgment calls. And the candidates would have to make the case. In the second debate, a different approach in which you saw that David Muir decided we are going to fact check. And of course, here's the challenge. That's often in the eyes of the beholder. It's often a judgment call. And there is very severe criticism coming from some quarters that all the fact-checking was on one side instead of the other side. So last night you saw a pivot that was going to be one in which it's up to the candidates. If someone makes a misstatement, then the opposing candidate has to call them out on it, and they need to correct the record. It's an obvious challenge, but it's not so easy to solve. And I thought the solution of letting the candidates debate is probably the better one. Otherwise, you're going to have a real challenge on those judgment calls. Even with that, you saw there was controversy last night with some of the fact-checking, particularly as it related to Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. You saw them get into that. But the caller, Sally, asked a very good question. If Tim Walz is taking some liberty with the statute, for example, in Minnesota on abortion, and which J.D. Vance has read in his Bring It to, and where's the fact-checking on the statute? If Vance is taking some liberties on the transfer of power, who's going to check it? Well, the answer is actually the candidate on the other side. And I thought at times Walz was very effective in fact-checking Vance, and Vance was very effective in fact-checking Walz.
Yeah, and they were both very prepared.
They were both very well prepared.
Well, Rick Mullaney, thank you so much for coming on the program today. We really appreciate your insights and all of your thoughtful comments.
Great being with you.
Yeah. Coming up next, the modern development trend, but one that's only just making its initial impression on the First Coast. It's known as the agrihood. And here to discuss it, I'm joined by Fred Jones, urban planner at Haskell and a member of the Downtown Development Review Board. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Ann.
Also, I'm here with Kim Dinkins. She is a policy director with 1,000 Friends of Florida. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning.
Thanks for making the drive today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
And joining us by phone, Stuart Korfhage, managing editor at the Jacksonville Business Journal. Stuart, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Terrific. Thanks so much for being here. Fred Jones, I want to start with you. There is an increasingly popular trend in land use here, but we're just starting to see it in Northeast Florida. So describe what we mean when we're talking about an agrihood.
Yeah, I think really the easiest way to describe this is it's the intersection of real estate and local food production and agriculture coming together. And I think it's almost a new way to conceptualize the traditional master plan community that's centered around local food production, agriculture as the key amenity, the focal point, with still residential as a fundamental driver, but thinking a little bit differently than maybe your grandparents' golf course community. It's sort of the antithesis of that. It's a less resource intensive model of development.
And so I've seen that there's, an estimated 200 of these across the country. They're in at least 30 states. There are some other ones in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
The roots are kind of in almost this, COVID era change and what people were looking for in a development. Also kind of married to this farm to table movement and sustainability. It's almost like a CSA that you can live in.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's very millennial driven. I mean, I don't think it's so much of a fad, but it's much more of a trend that you see, like the demand for authenticity, artisan, local food production, farm to table, as you say. And all of this becomes, I think, a way to be able to reimagine our communities, folks that maybe have lived in traditional neighborhoods that had, that were close to their food production. They want to be able to sort of replicate that in a new community or a new town that is centered around agriculture. And I think it certainly fits the demand that the millennials that now are wanting to be aging into those home buyers, now they want to be able to have that same sort of thing that they had maybe in a city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Kim, these projects aren't without controversy. They are in some cases seen as kind of a nose under the tent into agricultural lands, carrying with them a big development footprint.
Yes. I think conceptually, the agrihoods are really cool and interesting types of projects. What we are seeing, though, is that they are tend to be located outside of our urban service areas, and they're large footprints with the same infrastructure needs that a typical development would need. And so when we're looking at where these projects are located, that's what ends up becoming the more concerning aspect of them.
And 1,000 Friends of Florida has, in fact, been involved in a fight against one of these in eastern Orange County.
Yes. So the fight was, though, again, just the location of the project. So not anything to do with the way that the agricultural community, the agrihood was going to be operated necessarily, except that there is the question always of, is this an agricultural project with a residential component, or is it a residential project with a garden, a large garden? And so the issue becomes how this is being presented to our decision makers and our policymakers and what they think is appropriate for their own communities.
Stuart, I want to bring you into the conversation. You have covered St. Johns County for many, many years, and you're very familiar with the southwest portion of the county, which to date is still a fairly agricultural place. And that is exactly where we're talking about this proposed development going in. It's off of Cabbage Hammock Road, which I guess gives everybody a little bit of an idea as to the location. But describe for people who aren't familiar what that area is like and kind of how this development would fit in, where it would be.
Well, there's still a lot of farming in southern St. Johns County, and I think people that live there are very adamant about trying to keep it that way. And so you talk about the Honey Branch.
Honey Branch, yes, is one of them. Yes.
Yeah. That is, something where they're going to allow a lot of agriculture to still take place, but you're adding 54 lots that are all 1.5 to 2 acres. So it's not a densely populated thing. I know it saves a lot of land that's been used by farmers previously and will continue to be used by farmers. So I think that's one of the big draws for for having that take place. People don't want to lose that ag land.
And how much agricultural land is in that area that's currently used for farming actively?
In Olive, I don't know the exact acreage numbers, but I mean that is agriculture intensive. Pretty much everything, between the interstate and Putnam County, there in the Elkton area. With a small area there of Hastings, you have the small Hastings downtown, but there's not much of that.
Right. A small kind of agricultural town there. And so there's also this other much larger development that is being proposed. It's actually by the same developer as Shearwater, which is 20 miles to the north, but a very different looking project, Fred.
Mm-hmm.
The Shearwater is kind of a traditional, it's off of County Road 210. It's 2,000 homes. This other project would be, 3,000 homes, more than 3,000 homes.
Yeah, and that's, to the point. I mean, when you think about the cons of this, is it really, to your point earlier, just a residential community that just has a little garden feature in it? I mean, when you start talking about 2,700, acres and 3,300 units, are we really describing anything that's different than your traditional master plan community that we've been doing over here for the last 30 years that folks really, have concerns about, because they still are going to require substantial amounts of water and sewer and roadway infrastructure that a golf course community would require. So again, I think that fundamental question is, do these develop the national home builders that are starting to see this? Do they just go, hey, this is just a different opportunity, a way for us to kind of monetize these demands around a agricultural living versus a golf course community? But really, it's just the same suburban sprawl development typology with disconnected streets, and everybody has to drive everywhere, and it costs the county tremendous amounts of infrastructure to put in.
Yeah, Kim.
Yeah, I would just echo the same, that it really depends. We've described two very different types of communities. One that is agriculturally centric with fairly small lots, but also those lots are going to, 1.5 to 2 acres is a pretty large lot that typically would be on a well and septic tank. So that's going to have its own environmental impacts and concerns. But a 3,000 home development, again, is vastly different. So there's a lot of variation in what we might be describing as an agrihood.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about a new trend in development. It has arrived on the First Coast, or at least the developers are hoping that it will arrive on the First Coast. If you have questions about an agrihood, if you want to know more about it, you can call us on air at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. Stuart, what kind of reaction? I mean, you say that the community there is interested in maintaining an agricultural identity. Obviously, there's a lot of development pressures in St. Johns County, and it is clearly moving in that direction. So kind of describe for us what you hear about that tension.
Well, everyone is afraid of losing, the rural character of their neighborhood. And you've seen it all over the county. A lot of places in the county have already lost that. I mean, even off State Road 16, 20 years ago, a lot of those neighborhoods were considered more rural, and you've seen them. A lot of the big things have filled in since then. So I think everyone is really, really worried about seeing a major development in the southern part of the county now, because I think if a big farmer were to sell hundreds of acres and then put another large master plan community like in the Elkton area, I think everyone's afraid that that's going to be like the first domino is going to fall, and the whole thing is just going to become like County Road 210 is. When I moved to here in 2000, County Road 210 was still mostly pretty open, and same with State Road 16 out toward World Golf, and a lot of people had some very nice places out there that were very rural and that there aren't anymore, and so people worry about the whole county becoming that, and so there's been a lot of resistance to that sort of thing, which is why I think a lot of people like the idea of the Honey Branch development because it wasn't the super intensive development that you've seen, all over the county.
Yeah, that's a much smaller version of this, as Kim was saying. What's interesting about this, Fred, is the founding father of this movement sort of is a guy named Farmer D. He's known as Darren Jaffe. He is a sort of hippie from Wisconsin with dreadlocks, and he's a big fan of biodynamic farming. He had a falafel stand. I mean, he's a kind of the prototype of a progressive, greeny kind of thinker. But he has become a consultant for many of these new communities. I heard him recently in a podcast interview on the Joe Gardner show. Let's just hear a little of what he had to say.
I just realized that having my farm a couple hours away from the nearest city was not going to have the impact quickly enough that was needed. I started to realize we need lots and lots of these farms. We need a farm in every community. I say in my book, I took a little bit of a Johnny Appleseed approach, right? So it was like, I'm going to sell my farm and I'm going to go help try to plant the seed for other farms all over the place. I want to be in the, quote, business of starting farms.
And Kim, obviously that is the path that he's chosen. He's helped bring online one of the signature agri-hoods, Serenbe and Arden in Florida. So he basically helps developers connect with farmers, helps them sometimes staff the farm with people who are willing to trade their work for maybe living there. And so he has built this empire really of this new model and is very idealistic.
Yeah, I really appreciated what he said about the idea of needing a little farm in every community. And I think that a lot of people can get behind that. But where the issue comes in is creating your community outside of an urban area that then requires those, again, the infrastructure and all of the things to sprawl out. And then we end up continuing this pattern that Florida has been in for decades of fill, sprawl, infill, sprawl some more, infill. And then we don't end up with the maximizing the public investment in infrastructure that we need.
So a land use attorney that I know referred to this as the kale of land use, and an example of greenwashing kind of at its finest. I want to ask you, Kim, about, one of the projects that has been cropping up, I think maybe this year for the 7th time, is a development in Orange County that residents are vehemently opposed to, but kind of keeps coming back and is now coming back in this format of an agrihood. This is maybe more difficult to mount a community battle against. I mean, the name of this place is Sustainy. It's kind of like the name of it, right? Is suggests sustainability. And does it bring people on board because of that?
I think so. I think in Orange County and that eastern portion of the county, they have a very robust community organization, and the people in Orange County are used to having to come up against these types of developments, not necessarily the agri-hoods, but just be aware of what's coming into their community. This Sustainy is right along the Econ River and in a lot of environmentally sensitive areas. And so I think there's also transportation limitations. So that I think is what is one of the major factors that's making it difficult to approve for the local government. But, we've talked about the infrastructure, but also the ecosystem services that these areas provide and the necessity for connectivity for wildlife and things like that we're losing at a record pace in Florida now.
Yeah. I'm going to take a call from Olivia in Durbin Park. Good morning, Olivia. Go ahead.
Good morning. So my question is, I am currently renting and looking for a new place to live. And in these agri-hoods, they sound amazing. But I was wondering, are we, as residents, going to be able to take part in farming? I would love to be a part of, creating food or, just being a part of nature more often.
Yeah, Olivia, thanks for the call. Fred, my understanding is that in these neighborhoods, they not only, there's farming, but there's also some you-pick areas. There's also some tutorials and teaching, labs that they give to people in the community and outside the community.
Yeah, exactly. And I think partnerships and bringing in subject matter expertise and oversight in these things is very critical. It's not as simple as just setting aside the land and say, hey, go farm this residence, because, farming is a very labor intensive and skilled profession. And so, but again, at the same time, the opportunity for residents to engage in this and have set-asides for them to pick their own food and to cultivate is an attractive feature of these communities. But it's not just a panacea. I mean, a lot of times we've seen some examples where if there's not good oversight, not good partnerships, some of these things struggle to make money. They take on a lot of debt. We've had issues where I've read some stories where folks, indiscriminately go in and just pick whatever they want. And so there can be challenges, and I think that's part of the whole challenge in this thing, is that it's not just have a simple set aside, go farm, and everything's going to be this panacea.
Stuart, I want to ask you about the development trends in the southern part of St. Johns County, in that southwest portion. There was a period, pre-recession, where there seemed to be some very specific designs on large-scale developments in that area, and that kind of got slowed down. Is there a sense that that's picking back up, that those development pressures are increasing? I know you referenced, the fear that this would be the first domino to fall in that Elkton area, but there's so much land. I would imagine that is only becoming more valuable.
Excuse me, it certainly is. I think right now, if you look at what has been approved and what has not been approved in the last year or two by the county commission, because in St. John's, most land is zoned for very not very dense development. It's usually most of it's open rule, and so you need approval from the commission to get to do a big master plan community for the most part. And so what I've seen is recently there's been so much pushback, even in places that already have quite a bit of residential development, that people don't want a whole lot more. So I would say the political environment right now is not very conducive for someone to come in and get a big approval like a Silverleaf or a Nocatee or something like that in the southern part of St. Johns County. I would be very shocked if somebody could pull that off right now.
And you think that holds true even if the development is this agrihood style? You think that the concerns about growth in that area, it would still be prohibitive for people on the commission?
I do if it's a large scale thing. Now the commissioners were very receptive to the Honey Branch development, but very little of that was actually residential. There's only 54 lots in that. So something like that, I think people would get behind. Not everyone even loved that one, to be honest with you, but I think people can tolerate that. But if you're talking about 1,000 homes, even if they try to brand it as an agrihood, I think most people would kind of see through that and realize that it's just a way to, maximize the acreage and get more homes out there, which is what developers do, and that's the way it goes. But I think, people see that many more cars are going to be in their neighborhood. They're not going to like it, and I think they'd push back pretty hard.
And Stuart, to your point, growth was the central issue in the county commission race. There's still, I think, some races ongoing there for November that are in, kind of runoff circumstances. But this has been the chief narrative for people running for office down there this last election cycle. People specifically saying, slow the growth down.
Yeah, and you've been hearing that every commission meeting that you watch, you'll see that, and just even people that like in a neighborhood like where I live, where there are a lot of new developments that have already happened, and it is not super densely populated, but pretty populated. And they'll try to bring in an infill type of neighborhood that's going to cause extra traffic and maybe build a new road, and people are they're exhausted by it. They're just exhausted by it because they've seen so much change in the last decade and a half, and they just don't like the idea of that there's going to add another 1,000 cars here, another 1,000 people here at this intersection, and right or wrong, they're just exhausted by the constant pressure that development has brought.
We've got a call from Mitchell in Palatka. Good morning, Mitchell. Go ahead.
Yes. I'm actually doing that sort of agricultural residence. I've got 3 acres, and I'm living out in a failed residential area that was subdivided for houses, but it's low-lying and flood-prone, and for that reason, it's really not all that feasible for house building. I've got 9 goats, and I've been here for 21 years now. Recently, I've had a neighbor move in and buy 5 acres to do the same sort of thing and put in a trailer with solar panels. I'm off the grid, and I'm on solar panels. And people that come by say, I had people come by and say, oh, you're doing what I want to do.
Well, it's true, Mitchell. Thank you for the call. Fred, there is, as you said, this ideal, I think increasingly this, post-COVID idealistic and somewhat, this modern farmhouse trend, a little bit of retro nostalgia for a period of bygone times, perhaps where people were, living in farming communities.
Yes, I mean, I think again, it's something that's sort of here to stay. I think people are much more conscious of what they consume and put in their bodies, and I think folks, there's a huge demand for folks to want to be able to produce their own things and do it in a sustainable manner. I think the idea is just how do you find the right balance in doing a development project with this type of amenity here, and to avoid, to your point, just kind of couching this as the same type of thing that we did 20 years ago. I'm kind of intrigued too, because I think about St. Johns County and really what happened. If you think about it, when the recession happened, there was substantial development interest south of 208 all the way to the Flagler County line 20 years ago. I think there were 5,000 dwelling unit homes planned. And if it weren't for the recession, that stuff was kind of happening. You could see the county commission in favor of it at a time. It sort of stopped. So you kind of think about, if it weren't for that, what would it have been there right now? Would the open rural character have been preserved? But I think, again, this is, at least to me, in my estimation, a much more sustainable approach to thinking development, because you've got private property rights here that you have to think about, and the 5th and 6th generation of these landowners that are kind of figuring out, what do we do with this property that we have, and how do we, it's our right to monetize it, but can we do it in a sustainable fashion that the community can get behind?
We've got an email from Bree. She says, if the choice is between cookie cutter homes with miles of grass or homes which provide some level of habitat for our local wildlife and promoting a farm to table economy, I think I'll go with the latter option. It's interesting, Kim, to her point, I spoke to a realtor who said, when they're contacted by people who are interested in one of these communities, they're not looking in that area for other homes. They want to live in that community or in another agrihood elsewhere. It's not, oh, I want to live in St. Johns County. It's like, I want to live in one of these places, and I don't care where it is. That's where I'm going.
Right. That makes perfect sense. I mean, I think that it is such a compelling concept. I can't say I wouldn't want to live in an agrihood. But I think it just speaks to the fact that people are looking for this sense of community, this sense of place. They want to know where their food is coming from. This kind of reminds me of, I'm actually from Marion County. I was saying before that it kind of reminds me of a lot of our 55 and up communities where people have those types of amenities, and they have the continuing education and the learning opportunities. And it just seems like some of our younger families want the same thing. And we have to have a wide variety of housing options for folks to have. And so it's not that it doesn't make sense to have agrihoods. It just, again, goes back to where they are located. And I think that they make sense sometimes on the edge of an urban boundary or within an urban area as their own community. We have so many gated communities in Florida. Why not make one of them an agrihood? So I think that it makes perfect sense for that to be the case.
And yet, this one that we were talking about earlier, this Sistani, it's, on a piece of land that has been a cattle ranch for years. So it is truly agricultural. It was acquired, some years back by some developers in Texas. And, as you say, it's outside the urban service area. They estimate it would be 40,000 traffic trips a day, 1.3 million gallons of fresh water every day that would be used just on this one facility. And so they're not passive
Right.
home developments,
That's
right?
correct. Right. They are as intensive as any other development that we can, depending on the form that they take. And like we talked about before, they can be multiple things. But I think that it's just really important for local governments to have a plan. That I think that St. Johns County is a great example of where they have an opportunity to maybe look at their urban growth boundary or their urban services boundary and say they're undergoing their evaluation and appraisal report process right now, and have an opportunity to really look at what their residents want in the future and say, this is where we might be able to contemplate some of these types of developments. They have an opportunity to go back to some of the decisions that were made maybe in the early 2000s where those developments have not happened and say, okay, well, we have a planned unit development here that has expired maybe, and it's an opportunity for us to let developers and the community know what type of development we want to have here and what we expect.
And Fred, are you, though, skeptical when you talk about a development that's of this creation and this sort of idealistic utopian vision when it is being built by kind of the same mega high volume home builders that have built many a faceless neighborhood across this region?
No, you're exactly right. And I think about, the podcast that you listen to, the founder of this, this is sort of the law of unintended consequences. Once these national home builders, Pulte, Toll Brothers of the world, start to see that, wow, there's obviously a huge untapped demand for these communities. We know how to do a master plan community. We've been doing them this way for years. But, oh, by the way, now we don't have to build it around a golf course and a swimming pool, but we may be able to do a conservation easement and have a community garden and let the homeowners association figure out how they want to best manage it. For them, it's win-win. So I think it's obvious that they would want to be part of this game, if you will, of real estate transactions. And so I think from their standpoint, I don't think it's going to go away. And I think that we just have to be very mindful about the way we develop these things. And I think smart planning principles still hold true. So if there's ways in which we can cluster the development and we could limit the infrastructure provision and things of that nature that we've always thought about in terms of building great communities, that's what we have to be able to hold the fire to them for.
And of course, setting something in place, Fred, that actually sustains on its own as a functioning farm. I mean, as you said, some of these are not like soybean crops, right? These are heirloom tomatoes and spring greens and things that people want to consume in these farm to table style communities. They're not really easy to garden. They do require a level of skill and mastery for the length of, the time that those farms and those communities exist.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So you may be somebody that, the earlier caller wants to live in a community like this and may have had a little garden in their backyard, but it's a much different animal when you start thinking about an actual huge plot of land that's developing multiple crops. And I think it's important. I mentioned earlier partnerships. Sometimes, there's been universities that have engaged with this as well, but finding the right group. I mean, you can also lease it to a farmer to continue to do that, which is actually a good model. But I think it's very important that you know what you're getting into as a community when you start to develop one of these projects.
Well, it is a fascinating subject, agrihoods, and I welcome all of you for being here. Thanks so much, Kim Dinkins, Fred Jones, Stuart Korfhage. Thanks so much for being here, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we meet the men behind a gender-bending stage version of the classic sitcom Golden Girls.
The Museum of Science and History presents Mission Astronaut, a new exhibition exploring life in space. Mission Astronaut is open September 21st through January 5th. More info at mosh.org. Congaree Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpen.com.
On the next Fresh Air, actor, comedian, and activist John Leguizamo. His latest project is an ambitious docuseries on PBS about the history of Latinos in the Americas, covering thousands of years, from pre-Columbian Inca, Maya, and Aztec civilizations to the fight for Latino civil rights. Join us
today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Tech giants, major airlines, grocery chains, even Ticketmaster. Under the Biden administration, the Federal Trade Commission has significantly stepped up antitrust enforcement. However,
whether it's good for consumers, whether it's good for the economy, whether it's good for competitiveness, that is a different question.
We'll look for an answer and examine the antitrust legacy President Biden will leave behind. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Who will the U.S. pick as its second in command? Republican Ohio Senator J.D. Vance?
We have the most beautiful country in the entire world. I really do believe that.
Or Democratic Minnesota Governor Tim Walz?
We love this country.
They agree on that, but not much else. We discuss the first and likely only vice presidential debate next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. Miami's favorite girlfriends pick up where they left off in an R-rated theater production that is teeming with shoulder pads and sass and men. I'm joined now by actors Vince Kelly, who plays Blanche. Good morning, Vince.
Good morning.
And Adam Graber, who plays Rose. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning.
So it's a delight to have you here. Golden Girls is a well-known commodity. It ran from 1985 to 1992, 180 episodes. How deeply steeped in Golden Girls were you, Vince, before you got into this role?
Yeah, it was always pretty much part of my life. When I was younger, I stayed with my grandmother a lot, and she would watch the show, and me and the Golden Girls both debuted in the same year. We both came out in 1985. So when I was like 4 and 5, she was, the show as well, and it's in its run, and I called it the old lady show. I'd be like, "Oh, Nana, we watch old lady show. Do you want to watch old lady show?" And I didn't understand that it wasn't on every day, because the shows I liked were on every morning, like my little cartoons and stuff. And she was like, "It's only on one day." So I remember I would always get to spend the night at her house on Saturday, and we would watch it together. I didn't understand the jokes, but she had a great time, and I thought that was fun.
You're right, and the humor is always a little bawdy, but this is a notch above that. Adam, tell us a little bit. You play Rose.
I do.
Tell us, first of all, what your character is doing in this stage version. And
sure.
It's bonkers, right?
Oh, it's absolutely off the rails. But I think we stay true to the characters, but we're just taking a couple of liberties, as Blanche and Rose have come together and put together a social media empire, essentially, by creating a dating app for seniors. So we're helping, I would say, the greater good and letting these seniors find love again, Dorothy being one of those seniors. And her mother, Sophia, has actually gotten into a little bit of legal trouble.
Uh-oh.
And one of the people that she finds on the app, Dorothy, happens to be the prosecutor of Sophia.
Oh.
So hilarity ensues, if you can.
Hilarity ensues. You're, portraying these characters obviously in a very different way. This is kind of a parody, drag, gender bending performance. And you're remaining true to them. There are people who are diehard fans. So how do they receive that performance?
I think that being diehard fans, we do a lot of work to really, like I said, stay true to the characters. Our impressions, we've worked really, really hard on these.
Yeah, I think that's what's fun, is that we're diehard fans. So it's for us, by us, kind of almost. I like to say that we are incredibly serious about how ridiculous we are. We've painstakingly recreated these characters and the set and the costumes and everything. So I think that the level of work that we put into it kind of gives us the pass to be like, even though we're going to say some silly, crazy, insane stuff, like it's coming from number one, a place of love, and number two, like an art. Like we're actors. We're not just like your average girl off the street, just like putting on a little show. So,
Can you give us just a little taste of the Blanche and Rose repartee while we're here?
Oh goodness, is it 10 in the morning?
Yeah. Do the beginning of Act 2, Scene 3.
Act 2, Scene 3. Oh, Blanche, I keep trying to tell you. The complaints about the new creaking update are piling up faster than we can answer them.
Rose, I keep trying to tell you that I am the company's CEO. Honey, I don't have time for that.
I know, Blanche, but this is serious.
Very, very authentic. I think that's terrific. You guys are great.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you should see the costumes.
Yeah.
So this show runs from October 1st. So it started last night. It runs to the 6th. What kind of reaction do you get like during the performance, after the performance? Do you find people are very interested in meeting and interacting with you?
Yeah, that's what's so great about our show that's, different than maybe your average stage show is we do a meet and greet after. So if you are so inclined, you can, for a little nominal fee, come up and you get to come on the set, you get to go on the Golden Girls couch and you take a picture with us and we can chat. And it is really great. We have, so many people will come up and they'll say, I just had back surgery and I watched your show, like the Golden Girls, not our show, but they watch Golden Girls and it really helped them through. Or, they'll have people come up and say, I recently lost my mom and this was like our thing. And, Golden Girls likes to bring people together and it has this multi-generational appeal. So to get to be a part of that is great. And to get to have that specific interaction with the fans is really, really special.
Yeah.
And to be clear, I mean, you grew up watching this, but this show is designed kind of 18 and up, right? It's not a kid's show.
Our show is, it's not a kid's show. We do,
You like to say that it's been now on streaming services.
Yeah. It's as if the Golden Girls never went off TV, but they just kind of moved to like maybe HBO Max, so they can like say some stuff.
Well, Vince Kelly, Adam Graber, it's a delight to meet you both. Thanks so much for coming in and break a leg.
Thank you so much for having us and being a friend.
Yes.
That's our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. If you have either, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our show is produced by Stacey Bennett and directed by Brady Coram. Jamie Valet is our associate producer, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow when we talk to Northeast Florida Representative Sam Garrison, the architect of the Florida bill that bans public sleeping. I'm
Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
On October 18th and 19th, violinist Stefan Jakif takes center stage to perform Sibelius's Violin Concerto with the Jacksonville Symphony, paired with Elgar's Enigma Variations and Britain's Variations for Orchestra. Information at jacksymphony.org.
This is WJCT News 89.